So, welcome to the first lesson, or the first introductory portion of sustainability and society. So I would like to first have you start by taking a look at this photo, and this is a real photo. It was taken in 2018 in California when they were having the wildfires. And think about what it symbolizes in terms of sustainability. And maybe think about this as we go through this initial lesson. Okay, so today the overarching questions we're going to ask are, what is sustainability? Is sustainability just this academic topic? Like, are we just taking a class here and this information is really only relevant to the class, or does it go beyond the class? We're going to look at some of the definitions of sustainability, a brief introduction to systems thinking, which we'll address in more detail at a later point, and then look over the 3E framework. Okay, so first of all, what is sustainability and where do we see it? So I want you to think, is this a popular or relevant topic, and also what is sustainability? So go ahead and feel free, if you want to, Google sustainability or green or sustainable development, see how many results you get. And also take a look at some of the things that pop up in your screen. The last time I checked this, over 1 billion, that's billion with a B, results came up on a Google search. And so the idea here is that, sustainability has become an increasingly popular and important topic in everything from academia to politics, even pop culture. It's sort of cool to be green anymore, which does have both a good side and a bad side to it. But I want you to think about some places or contexts you've heard about sustainability or green. So think about your own life, maybe what you're studying, what you do for a living, whatever the case may be, and think about, are there any aspects that any aspects of anything that you do where you've heard the term sustainability or green. And there's a lot. I mean, we could go on and on about this, but look at the BP oil spill. It was about 10 years in 2010 or so. Renewable energy, wind has become a major industry in the US, across the world. The solar industry, of course, has as well. Tesla has burst onto the scene. Now electric vehicles, it's actually not too abnormal to see an electric vehicle. That's a relatively new phenomenon. The forest fires, California, Brazil, Australia, as I record this in our winter of 2019, 2020, Australia is basically on fire. Local food, organic food, reusing and recycling, sustainable business. So it's all over the place. The point is, we're not going to go through the whole list, but it's really just all over the place. If you pay attention, stuff is called green this and green that, and sustainable this, sustainable that. So it's become a really important topic. So I want you to first consider that sustainability is not just something that we read about in class or learn about in class. It is absolutely everywhere at this point, all over the place. Okay, so let's think about, now that we sort of start thinking about the fact that sustainability is everywhere, let's think about, what does it actually mean? So one of the drawbacks of sustainability and green being such a sort of popular topic of conversation and popular topic in general is that if you call something sustainable, or if like everything has a sustainable element to it, or people try to convince you that there's a sustainable element to it, it can easily lose its meaning. Okay, so one of the goals of this class is for you to understand what it actually means to be sustainable. So what does it mean to be sustainable? We'll think from a very basic level, and this is sort of cliche to do, but it works really well in this instance, is that if to be sustainable, we have to be able to sustain it, right? And so a really good starting point with what sustainability is if we're assessing whether or not something is sustainable, just think, can we keep doing this thing indefinitely? Okay? Very fundamental, very basic, but very essential to the idea of sustainability. By definition, if something's sustainable, it has to be able to last, at least for the foreseeable future. But it gets a little tricky, right? I mean, first of all, it's hard, no one can predict the future. Second of all, can we keep doing this? Who's we? Is it us in the US? Is it we as a global society? Is it we wherever you are? Is it the current generation? Is it the next generation? So forth. So once you get down into the details of how to actually figure this out, it gets a little messy. So let's just look at a few more examples of sustainability not being an academic topic. So again, this is I'm recording this in the winter of 2019 to 2020. In the summer of 2019, there were massive Brazilian forest fires. Okay, so over 10,000 square miles of land, which is I'm recording this from Delaware. It's 4 times the size of the state, and they're actually increasing the over time, so 3 times as many as last year. It turns out they have been worse in the past at certain points, but they're really bad this year. Okay, so what's the cause here? Most of these are unnatural. Okay, so forest fires are a natural phenomenon. They've happened without humans being around, but most of these were set by humans to clear land. Deforestation is up. So why are people burning the rainforest down? Mostly these sort of economic activities. Farming, cattle ranching is a really big one. They'll burn down the rainforest, then graze cattle. Gold mining, logging. So there's a lot of causes. If you look at some of the sort of underlying causes of that, Brazil has become a major exporter of agricultural goods. So 30% of the world soy exports, about 14% of the world beef exports. They become a major player in the world agriculture scene. So there's this motivation to make money on these international markets, and some that has helped incentivize some of this activity. In addition to that, the current president of Brazil, he doesn't exactly encourage it, but he doesn't exactly not encourage it, we'll say. So that's become a really problem as well, including climate change. Climate change has also made conditions drier. Okay, so again, this is a real topic happening just this year as I record this. And so what are the problems with this? Well, I mean, other than, we don't want the rainforest just to burn down because we would like to preserve nature. About 1/10 of the world's species live in the Amazon rainforest, so that's a problem. Climate change is creating dry conditions across the world, so forest fires have become more common all across the world. And if you look at CO2 emissions, which is a primary consideration in sustainability in terms of climate change, about 50% of all of Brazil's CO2 emissions come from fire. Okay, so you can see our CO2 emissions. This is our CO2 emissions over time. And they're obviously going up, particularly since the 1900s and the 1950s. And this is actually our meat supply per person. Okay, this green line is China. So, but all UK, Germany, United States kind of up and down. But the point here is not that the individual countries, to consider the individual countries, but overall as other countries in particular develop a bigger middle class, they start demanding more consumptive lifestyles, including consuming meat. So again, back to our definition, is this sustainable? Can we keep doing this indefinitely? Can we keep increasing our CO2 emissions indefinitely? Can we keep increasing our meat consumption indefinitely? Okay, so again, from a sustainability perspective, you want to think about, can we keep doing what we're doing? So without getting into too much detail, these charts are demonstrate the increasing economic inequality in the United States. Okay, so this is after-tax income, and this is the income after taxes in the U.S. So the top line is the wealthiest people. So basically what's happening here is the wealthier are getting wealthier, those of other incomes are maybe getting a little wealthier, but not at the same rate. So obviously, I think we all know that economic inequality is increasing over time. And this shows the actual wealth gap. So this is not income, this is the amount of resources that people own. So this is like all their property, all their money, everything. And then this red line is the wealthiest 1%. Okay, and this goes from 1913 to the 2015 or so. And you can see the top 1% owned, so in 1913 they owned about 45% of all of the wealth, whereas the bottom 90%, which is the blue line, owned about 20%. Okay, so that's 1% and that's 90%. So you can see this whole Gilded Age in the early 1900s. We had a lot of inequality, and then you got this growth of the middle class right around World War II and this post-World War II period. And then you had this period where the the bottom 90% actually had more wealth than the top 1%. And starting right around 1980, the wealthy start to get wealthier, and then the middle class kind of starts to go down. Now we're back to basically Gilded Age levels of inequality. So, all right, so this doesn't seem very fair, but it's an unfair world we live in. So what are the real problems about this? So one big problem is that as the rich get richer and the others don't, inflation causes things to become more expensive, and it becomes harder to afford things. A really big part of this is our economic system is largely based on trust. Our political system is largely based on trust. Our social system is based on trust. When people see this inequality, they start losing faith in the system, and you have these upheavals. And this is, as I narrate this in 2019, across the world, we've had a lot of upheaval. The U.S. with the Trump administration, what I just referred to in Brazil. There's right-wing governments in Hungary and Poland and some other areas across the world. Italy. That's because of the social unrest. It's not all because of economic inequality, but it certainly isn't helping. Let's put it that way. It generally undermines the economic system. What I mean by that is if these folks at the bottom don't have the money, they're the ones, they spend most, and as it turns out, all or even more than money than they have. So people in the 90% bracket tend to spend more money, and the people up here tend to not spend quite as much money. So it sort of undermines the economics system. A really, really, really big problem, particularly in the United States, is this concentration of power. So the wealthy, and this has happened as a result of both income inequality, but also politics and at least one Supreme Court decision and a few other issues. The wealthy in the United States in particular have a very outsized impact on the political system, okay, in a number of ways. So the question is, again, back to sustainability. Is this sustainable? Can we keep having this inequality? Can we keep a stable society going with this level of inequality? I'll do one last example with, I'm sure you've all heard of plastic pollution. So you look at the plastic pollution. Hopefully you all know that this is a problem, but you look at, I found this mind-boggling, that half of all plastics that have ever been made in the history of humanity were made in the last 15 years. Incredible. And these plastics can last hundreds of years, okay? So some of these problems, so millions of animals are killed each year. One of the problems is the plastic will only break down to a certain point, and at below a certain point, it really doesn't get any smaller. And so like the base of the food chain, tiny organisms will eat these pieces of plastic thinking they're food, and that's harming the base of the food chain. Also, just from an economic perspective, I mean, who wants to go to this beach? So it's really a big problem. I found this actually fascinating. That 8 million tons of plastic waste go into the ocean every year. And so that's the equivalent of setting 5 garbage bags full of trash on every foot of coastline around the entire world. So again, fundamental question, can we keep doing this? Can we keep making all this plastic that doesn't actually break down eventually? Okay, so fundamental, 2 things. 1, these are real issues that we're currently dealing with. 2, if we're going to think about, if we want to consider if it's sustainable or not, we need to think about, can we keep doing what we're doing? Okay, so there's a bunch of things we could look at. We could look at the Flint water crisis, the border wall, Fukushima, which happened around 2010 or 12, Hurricane Sandy, which was a big problem in the U.S. You had the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, now AOC. So Bernie's main issue is economic inequality. I'm not here to endorse anyone, but the point is that his primary issue is inequality, and then you got AOC, who is economic inequality, but also the Green New Deal with which is totally all about sustainability. And then recently, in 2019, you had Greta Thunberg, that's become this world famous activist at the age of 15. Anyway, very big, important topics that affect us on a yearly, if not daily basis. Okay, so let's let's get into a few more definitions. The most commonly cited definition of sustainability out there is this one from the Brundtland Commission, which is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Almost without fail, when someone defines sustainability, they will somehow refer to this definition. There is no one definition of sustainability, but this is the most commonly cited one. And this is a really important one. This was the Brundtland Commission, which was convened by the United Nations. They put out a report in 1987, and it was the first time that global society got together to address sustainability. Okay, so it's a very famous definition and a very famous moment in the history of sustainability. So I want you to think about what's good or bad about this definition. Okay, what if you really want to apply this definition as well? So think about the definition itself, is it good or bad? And then if you wanted to apply it, what could be difficult about it? So go ahead and press pause and think about it. So some of the commonly cited issues are, first of all, the good part is it considers future generations. It may sound, like it's totally common sense, but this is not something that was typically integrated into planning. Okay, so planning for sustainable development, they formalized, they said, look, we need to figure out what's going to happen to future generations. Okay, another kind of a good thing, it's pretty vague, so if we're meeting needs, we can sort of cater that definition to accommodate a variety of sort of living conditions, right? But at least we're meeting the needs of people, so it does have some flexibility built into it. One of the really difficult and problems that are commonly cited with this definition is of what is a need. Okay, do you need a cell phone? Do you need a car? Do you need a sizable wardrobe for your job? So needs, really, if you boil down to needs, is it just food, water, and shelter? Is that enough to have a reasonably good quality of life? Again, I'm not here, I don't have the answer, but the issue is that we can sort of define needs in a lot of different ways, and it makes it very difficult to apply this actual. If you think of applying this definition, you need to think about what is a need and what are we sacrificing now to preserve for the future. So there's a lot of issues with this. However, it's generally accepted as a pretty good definition. Okay. Right, and is the environment in here? You could imply that the environment a clean environment is required to provide needs, but it's not explicitly in here, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so in a related note, sustainability is a very messy topic. There's never ever an easy solution. So just keep that in mind. So you don't necessarily need to know these other definitions, but it's just important to understand that there are other definitions out there, right? So improving the quality of human life within the carrying capacity of supporting ecosystems, or sustainability is to create and maintain the conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony. So that's a really good one. I kind of like this one from the EPA. But anyway, there's a number of definitions. There is no one definition of sustainability. But if you look at these definitions and you think about it, what's something that you think about probably on a daily basis, you pursue all the time, something that makes the world go round that's actually not mentioned in here? Okay, so one thing that's important to think about is money good or bad for sustainability? What role does it play in sustainability? Money itself, like the paper money or the metal money that you have, if you think about the physical resource, it's not worth very much at all. Okay, money is only good because it gets you things that you need or that you want. So from a sustainability perspective, we don't actually care about money other than the fact that money can provide things that can help people have a good quality of life. So even though a lot of our society is built around the pursuit of money, it's not necessarily good for sustainability. And we will dig into that in a lot more detail in future lessons. Okay, so instead of just defining sustainability, we can think about how to frame out sustainability, so a sustainability framework. So this is something we will refer to throughout the course, so I'm going to bring this up now. So if you think about three aspects of sustainability commonly referred to as the three E's. You have environmental side of things, right? So clean air and water, biodiversity, I think we all know what the environment refers to. Economic side of sustainability is not just about making money. It's not just about increased economic activity. It's really the nature of the economy. Okay, so do people have good jobs? Do they have a decent wage? Do they have respectable work? Do they have a decent standard of living? So really, from a sustainability perspective, the economy is not just about making money. It's about what is happening to people because of that income. So we really want to, it's all about a high quality of life. I mean, think about, who cares how much money you have? In and of itself, having money doesn't do anything. Maybe it gives you a sense of pride or whatever, but it's only what you can do with that money. So again, this may sound like an oversimplification of things, but we don't really care about money. We care about what money can do for us. Okay, and so from a sustainability perspective, that's really important to keep in mind, that you can have a really high income or have a country that's really wealthy, but if a lot of the people are suffering, a lot of the people are in poverty, we don't have a good economy. The other side of it is social equity. Okay, so this is the three E's are environment, economy, and equity. So those are your E's. So equity, it's not equality. So equity means that people have access to resources. That's all it means. Okay, so a socially equitable society is one in which it doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, where you're born, what family you're born into, your race, creed, gender, etc. You have an opportunity to achieve things that will help you get a high quality of life. Okay, it doesn't mean everyone has the same of everything. It is not the same as equality. Equity means people have access. They have the opportunity. If they have the opportunity and they don't take advantage of it, then that's a different situation. But at least the idea here is that you at least have access. And what you can think of is that sustainability, if you want to know if something is sustainable, assess if something is sustainable or not, from the 3E perspective, you ask yourself, does it promote all three of these aspects of sustainability? And if it does, then that's considered pretty good for sustainability. So that's the first important point, was can you keep doing what you're doing? And the second one is, does this thing promote all three aspects of sustainability now and in the future? Okay, so that's our 3E framework, very important. So quickly I'm going to introduce systems thinking. So systems thinking is a way to get away from sort of this traditional thinking where we think A causes B, right? So pretty straightforward linear line of thinking. We all know the world is a complicated place, so what systems thinking does is it recognizes that, and that things aren't so simple, that if you want to look at the what's causing something to happen, it's a very complex relationship. Okay, so it's interconnections and relationship. Nothing should be considered in isolation. From a common sense perspective, this makes total sense, but it's not always employed when we're thinking about problems. Okay. So again, back to our original example of the Amazon forest fires, you want to think about this from a 3E perspective. What are the environmental, equity, and economic impacts, right? So obvious environmental impacts, equity. Generally, what's going to happen is what is happening is that a lot of indigenous communities are suffering because of this. It's very inequitable. They don't have a choice in whether or not these forest fires are happening. That's just one example of equity. From economic, there's both good and bad, right? So it can increase economic activity, but how is it actually improving people's quality of lives? Again, good and bad. But if you want to think about how sustainable this is, not only do we think, can we keep doing this, but what are the 3E impacts? And again, with our plastic pollution, what are the environmental, equity, and economic impacts? I think environmental are obvious. Equity is, can be a consideration. One consideration in equity can be who's being impacted by wildlife being killed. Is it people that are subsistence, fishing communities? Whose beach is being polluted, right? So if you have a beach like this in a wealthy area, they're going to clean it up. If it's not in a wealthy area, probably won't get cleaned up. Economic impacts, again, there's both good and bad. So the production of plastic can help promote the economy, but is it really promoting quality of life? What is the long-term impact, economic impact, and the impact on quality of life of people? And finally, this economic inequality issue. We want to think about the environmental equity and economic impacts about this when you're evaluating sustainability. So not only can we keep having this unequal system, can it last, but what are the equity, economic, and environmental impacts? Obvious equity issues here with inequality, but economic impacts as well. Again, it's undermining the economy. People aren't able to have as high quality of life. Environmental issues can pop up as well. Okay, so the idea here, again, to summarize all of this, when we're thinking about sustainability, two main things you want to think about. Can we keep doing this indefinitely? And does this thing promote equity, environment, and economic sustainability now and in the future everywhere? Okay. Another thing to remember is that economy really refers to quality of life, not just more money. Systems thinking is considering interconnections, nothing in isolation. Again, we'll address all this in future lessons. And then overall, sustainability is not just an academic topic. Hopefully you recognize that by now. And that's it.